Welcome to the Buttonless Podcast with Allison
and Heather, coming at you live from Beading Dreams in Dallas, Texas.
During this broadcast, we will delve into stories of jewelry past and present, looking to amuse, delight, and possibly disturb you.
We record live bi-weekly on Twitch, Facebook, and YouTube. Because we record live, you may occasionally hear us interact with our stream viewers.
Join the online conversation and tune in to any of our channels at 7:45 p.m. Central Time on Wednesdays.
Just a warning, sometimes we get a little spicy.
Please be aware that the following broadcast may contain mature content. Thank you for supporting small businesses.
And we hope you enjoy our show.
Welcome all. I'm Allison.
And I'm Heather.
And we're so happy that you're here with us on the Button List. It is a podcast, yes. So our focus tonight is hidden spaces. So there's something fascinating about hidden spaces. Secret passages, hidden chambers, puzzle boxes, false drawers, and all other manner of concealed compartments appear again and again and again in theater, literature, and history. So today we're going to delve into the history of some of the tiniest hidden spaces, container jewelry. The idea of having a tiny secret chamber on one's person is endlessly intriguing. A way to conceal or occasionally reveal one's thoughts, feelings, alliances, and more. Tonight we focus on two particular types of hidden spaces, poison rings and lockets. Don't worry though, there are other hidden spaces that we are saving for future episodes.
Poison rings date back to ancient Asia and India. Turns out they were even older than we knew. Perhaps Shah Jahan from the Kohinoor and Orloff Diamonds podcasts.
Oh, Shah Jahan.
Even owned one. I know. I mean, Shah Jahan really got around. Especially...
He did. Well, I think he was also assassinated, so he might have been assassinated using a poison ring.
That's true.
That's pure speculation on my part.
We weren't there, so we cannot confirm
or
deny.
I have no references to imply that. It just, seems possible.
So in Western European culture, poison rings rose to prominence in the Middle Ages, approximately AD 476 to 1500. One of the most famous poison ring users in history.
Or maybe infamous.
Well, I would say infamous. She's infamous for so many reasons.
Yes, it's true. I should have written infamous. I'm the one who wrote the script.
But Lucrezia Borgia. She actually perfected a method of pouring wine while holding the bottle so the back of the hand is facing downward. And
which has got to be like...
Well, I mean, as long as you're not trying to do it on a podcast, you just
fair.
Put your hand
I'm
under
pretty
the
sure
bottle.
that Lucrezia was not trying to do it on a podcast.
She wasn't, no, in front of her face
she might
either.
she might have been doing it on a lot of other things, but not a podcast.
She was trying to be subtle, not demonstrate.
Fair.
Yes, kind of like Spider-Man. But she would pour while holding the bottle with her hand facing downward, so she could just dump the contents of her poison ring into the glass that she was pouring. And
oh dear.
I know. So people caught on, and then it was named after her Versare alla Traditora, which is the traitor's way of pouring.
We get to have fun. We get to talk.
We have a lot of languages.
Yes, we get to speak in Italian and German.
Yes. So
please don't judge us for either of those.
We're doing our best. But anyway, that method of pouring is still considered quite rude. Thanks, Lucrezia. Lucrezia. So poison rings, not just hers, became wildly popular in 16th century Europe. People were just going about poisoning each other
right and left and center. Like they were slinging poison in the streets.
Well, they don't want to waste it. I mean, that's...
I mean, why would you waste some good poison?
Right. You can use it on your enemies.
Or
yes.
Yes.
So they were so popular that they made their way into the popular entertainment of the time. So contemporary uses of the poison ring as a plot point include Verdi using a poison ring in the opera Il Trovatore.
Though interestingly enough, the character in Il Trovatore doesn't acid. Let's
You
try
do
that again. Doesn't assassinate anybody. She actually commits suicide, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit.
So during the reign of Louis XIV.
Oh, you're just adding French into the mix because you want to be fancy.
If we're going to do all the...
If we're going to do all the
languages,
why not?
There was a period of time when 367 orders of arrest were issued for poisoning within the court. Of these warrants, 281 were actually arrested, and the entire affair ended with 36 executions, besides the ones that were carried out by poison. So a lot of people dying.
Random fact. At this time, arsenic was so popular and easy to come by that it was nicknamed the widow's divorce.
Mm.
So, yeah, that's a thing. So at this point, anybody who was anybody in Europe had a food taster to sample their food and drink. Because, of course, you know, if you are a noble, why not get some lower ranking person to die in your place?
I hope they were paid well.
I doubt they were. I'm sure. No, I doubt they were paid well. They were probably paid a small stipend plus board and all the poisoned food they could eat.
Mm.
But something that really surprised me when I was researching food tasters is that this is actually a practice that continued until modern times. Adolf Hitler was reported, and by reported, it's pretty darn certain because she's got a name, which I didn't write down, but to have a food taster. She would taste the food every day at 8 a.m. and then it was sent to wherever Hitler was. And supposedly Vladimir Putin, present day, has a food taster. And I guess I find this surprising because I feel like with today's level of science, there should be a way to tell if food has been poisoned without putting somebody's life in danger. Like, don't you think?
I would think.
I mean, I guess one would hope that the food tasters have ready access to, you know, medical services and antidotes, but still, I don't know. In this day and age, you would have to pay me a lot of money to be a food taster. But so, as I inferred earlier, poison rings were not always used for assassination. They were carried by Roman soldiers and nobles alike as a last-ditch effort to avoid a painful death. So they were kind of the early Roman version of the fake tooth with the cyanide in it. And here we are back to Pliny the Elder.
Oh,
Pliny, from who lived from AD 23 to AD 79, recounts how a Roman official escaped torture by, and this one's a little extreme, by taking a bite out of his ring.
Nom nom. Because
the poison in this particular ring wasn't contained within like a hinged chamber. It was contained within a thin, fragile shell. So he literally like down on it to off himself. And then, oh God, I'm going to screw this up. I think I'm going to try not to screw this up. Because, right, we've got Latin in here, too.
Right.
So in AD 223, the teenage emperor Heliogabalus, that's right, yay, carried a poison ring, but was assassinated before he could use it.
Also, random fact, Heliogabalus, not a nice dude.
Ew.
One should really not make teenagers emperors.
No,
ever.
They're really not suited for it. Also, in a more modern incident, in 1794, the Marquis de Condorcet died by his own beringed hand in order to avoid the guillotine. Sidebar.
There was also an entire genre of jewelry dedicated to protecting the wearer from a poisoned cup. Quartz was thought to guard against poison, which is why we see it incorporated into many goblets and chalices over the centuries. Some people carried quartz amulets designed to be dipped into the cup to dissipate any possible deadly elements. Rings and talismans incorporating the image of a scorpion were thought to protect against poison. And there was also a stone called a toadstone, which didn't actually come from a toad. It is actually the fossilized...
Don't say anything, Corvus.
No. Because it didn't have anything to do with toads. It was a fossilized tooth of the Lepidopus fish, or
I have no idea.
Lepidotes fish. We have that problem where we've read more than we've heard.
Yeah.
And I know that a lot of you out there have had that problem too, so please forgive me. But that was thought to heat up in the presence of poison. And now, here's a sidebar to the sidebar, because there's another thing.
So is it like a parallel sidebar or a perpendicular sidebar?
I think it's just a nested sidebar.
Ah, cool.
Yes, it's inside the ring of the sidebar.
We like nested containers.
Yes,
here at the
we
Beading
do.
Dreams.
We do. So there's another type of sort of a stone that was used an awful lot to protect against poisons, and that's called a bezoar stone, or bezoar.
Okay, that's actually a real thing, because that was in...
It's a real thing that exists.
Okay.
And it is...
That was in a fictional book series about wizards.
Yes, and it does, in fact, exist in life.
I did not know that.
Yes.
So what is it?
So a bezoar is, or a bezoar is a mass trapped in your innards, usually in the gastrointestinal system somewhere. There are lots of different types of them, and they exist in different parts of your body, some outside the gastrointestinal canal. They're weird. They're weird and kind of gross, but really fascinating. So
does a kidney stone count?
A kidney stone does kind of... Kidney stones and gallbladders are bezoars, because essentially they're...
So save your kidney stones if you ever have them, in case you get poisoned.
Just in case. Well, gallstones and kidney stones are also used in Chinese medicine, I think. According to the internet, it is still used in Chinese medicine, but take all the internet with a grain of salt. So...
Wait, you don't want to make gallstone jewelry, Corvus? What's wrong with you?
Isn't that weird? So, several types of bezoars, and Diospyrobezoar is a specific type of bezoar, and this one was really interesting to me. This is how you know for sure that they're still happening rampantly, apparently. It's formed from upright persimmons, which something about them in your innards doesn't work super well, and they tend to form a mass, a concretion. And it's, in modern times, usually treated with Coca-Cola. Not because Coca-Cola is like something that will destroy everything, it just destroys certain things, including undigested, unripe persimmons. But it's saving people from surgery, because all they have to do is digest the Coca-Cola, and for almost all people, it actually solves the problem, which is very cool.
Interesting.
So food boluses are formed of parts such as seeds.
Sorry.
And
that continue.
They're the undigestible parts of the food. So if you eat fruit and you swallow the pith and the seeds and the pits, we're doing well.
Don't swallow the peats; those go on the cats.
Yes, and sometimes other things, including bubblegum. So it is true that bubblegum is not very easily digested. Sometimes it makes a bezoar. But the name derived from a Persian word, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce that, but a Persian word that literally translates to antidote. And so they were in common knowledge in the Middle East before they translated over to Europe through trade and the exchange of ideas that obviously always happens with trade. So it made it to Europe in about the 11th century. Stayed in use in Europe through the 18th century, which is when it was finally debunked and kind of fell out of common use.
Wait, how did you use a bezoar?
Well, it was believed to be an antidote to all poisons, like a universal antidote.
But do you hit somebody with it, or make
No, I mean that can certainly be an antidote to the poison before the poison happens. If you hit someone with a rock, the minute his head comes into view.
Wait, are we talking about iocane powder or a different poison?
Any poison. I mean,
fair.
But some were made into rings, so you could neutralize Lucrezia's wine,
Okay, got it.
or you could, whoever else wanted to add deadly flavor to your dish. If you happened to be in the court of Louis XIV, anything you could do to, lengthen your days by a few minutes might be good. In 1567, Ambroise Paré, who was a French surgeon, tested his own personal theory that a bezoar was not a thing. It was just...
Please tell me he didn't poison himself.
He didn't. But it wasn't much better.
Uh-oh. Who did he poison?
So a cook in Charles IX's court was sentenced to death and asked to be poisoned instead of hanged because he figured, I've got a chance with the bezoar. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But, at least I have a better than zero chance, because hanging is definitely going to work.
Mm-hmm. One way or another.
And you can probably guess how that turned out. And the answer was he survived for 7 hours in agony because it didn't work, shockingly. But ironically, and I love this part, modern experiments actually show that certain types of bezoars, not all of them, but certain types, can neutralize arsenic. And here's how.
Oh dear.
So the toxic compounds in arsenic are arsenate and arsenite. And arsenate, if you remember all your equations in chemistry where you balance all the sides, so arsenate is neutralized by brushite, which occurs in a whole lot of bezoars. And
2 people just dropped into the absolute nerdiest part of this broadcast.
Welcome! So, it exchanges for phosphate because brushite is a phosphate compound. And arsenite binds to sulfur compounds in the proteins of degraded hair. So that's why certain types.
Oh, I have actually something that I didn't put in here about Lucrezia and her preferred poison, which is pretty gross.
Hello! It's so good to see you, Jennifer.
Yay!
So, as a sidebar, again, nesting information here, bezoars were actually responsible, or one particular one was actually responsible for a huge part of English common law. So, in 1603, Chandeleur versus Lopus was a case in which someone who had bought a bezoar, paid £100 for it at the time, which is the equivalent of about $37,000, sued the seller for the purchase price, because that was that's a lot of money to buy a rock. And there's no actual word on how the buyer found out the bezoar was fake. I mean, it could have been a real bezoar. It's really hard.
It just could have been the wrong type.
Exactly. But the findings introduced the rule of caveat emptor, which is buyer beware. And that became, a protection for sellers. They're, also known as the people with the money. So that particular doctrine lasted until the 19th century, when there were a couple more cases that started to contribute to the evolution of the doctrine of implied warranty. But anyway, so bezoars and caveat emptor all in the same...
But wait, I have 2 sidebars to the sidebar to the sidebar to the sidebar.
Carry on.
First of all, Cleopatra used to test her poisons on those condemned to die.
Ah!
So she just had her whole stable of convicted criminals, and she would just go trying poisons to figure out which ones were most painful and which ones were most effective, which ones were quickest.
Well, at least some people won out on that.
I'm pretty sure they all died in one way or another.
Well, they were convicted to death, so...
Yeah. And let's see, what was the other...
Sentenced to death, that's the one.
What was the other one? Shoot.
Lucrezia.
Yes. So her preferred poison was made from the intestines of pigs who had been poisoned with arsenic.
Oh, wow.
Or the spittle that frothed from their mouths after they'd been poisoned with arsenic.
Okay, so double layered poison.
So rancid pig guts were Lucrezia's favorite poison of choice.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Moving right along.
let's take this in a little bit more positive direction.
Shall we?
Because I don't know if we. I mean, pretty soon we're just going to wind up in the dungeon with the thumbscrews and the Iron Maiden. So the history of poison rings, however, indicates that they were not always used to deadly effect, because there are other things you can do with a tiny little secret chamber than murder people with it.
I like to just know I have it.
Well, exactly.
For later.
But so a lot of times the small chambers of poison rings were used to hold a scent, which makes it a type of pomander. And that scent had a couple of purposes. Number one was just to distract from the generally rank smell of, the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, because, you're talking about open sewers, people who don't bathe, like dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria. Like, it was stinky. But there was also a theory called the miasma theory, which was very popular at the time. And according to the miasma theory, a whiff of quote-unquote bad air could make you ill unto death. So a scented ring, a pomander, could protect you from the bad air and the miasma and literally keep you healthy. That was one of the beliefs of the time. The ring, in addition, could hold a miniature, a tiny portrait of the person that you loved, or maybe just a person that you were sleeping with. It could hold a lock of hair. That's kind of a precursor, not precursor. Precursor is not a word. Precursor to Victorian.
It is in A Night Before Christmas.
So it can hold a lock of hair or a religious relic. The religious relic thing is Oh, Corvus, you spoiled my next line. So anyway, the religious relic, there's actually going to be a whole podcast on that, because reliquaries, they're a whole other thing. But yes, now that Corvus spoiled it, poison rings are making a bit of a modern comeback, though more for novelty than nefarious purposes. And one article I read even suggested that you could use one to carry a convenient Xanax. Modern times call for modern rings, right?
Right.
So what's our next hidden space, Heather?
Lockets. And I know I've been fascinated by lockets my whole life. Probably you too.
Yes. Well, because I love containers. I love poison rings.
Absolutely.
I
even talked in the tutorial about how I love containers.
I love puzzle boxes.
Yes.
I would, if I had a secret room in my house, I would spend all my time in it.
Yes.
But I don't.
I'm excited that my brother's house has a secret space that's just big enough to stand in. You can't hang out in it. It's hot and it's terrible, but you can go in and close a door. And therefore it's endlessly fascinating. But according to Wikipedia, a locket is a pendant that opens to reveal a space used for storing small items such as a photograph or a lock of hair. The word locket, which is most likely derived from the Frankish word lock, or the Norse lock, meaning lock or bolt, first appeared in the 17th century, but the concept of a diminutive wearable container dates back much further. The earliest examples of container jewelry come from the Middle East and India, though it's proven difficult to tell exactly when or where the locket itself was born. The earliest examples date to the 16th century, when they most likely evolved.
That should say evolved.
Yes, from protection amulets and reliquaries. Older extant lockets often contain a painted miniature, because they couldn't take photographs, obviously. After the execution of Charles I, his followers carried hidden miniatures of him in rings, brooches, and pendants to secretly attest their continued allegiance. Those who could not afford a miniature could place a lock of hair in a locket, or either as a memento or a token of love.
And like poison rings, lockets were also used to contain scents, to protect from bad air. Sometimes they were the kind that we typically think of where they're double hinged or single hinged, double sided that opens. Sometimes one of the sides was actually filigree, so that one could inhale the clear air scent without actually having to open the locket. So there were a bunch of kind of designs that went with that. Sometimes these pomander lockets also contained miniature paintings of protective saints, just for good measure. And guess what else they sometimes contain,
Oh,
Heather?
I know. Opium.
Opium! No lie. Lockets often contain a concoction called Venice treacle. Sidebar. Venice treacle. Theriac, or theriaca, is a medical concoction originally labeled by the Greeks in the 1st century AD, and it was widely adopted in the ancient world in as far-flung places as Persia, China, and India. It spread along the Silk Road, and it was supposedly an antidote for a variety of poisons and diseases. It was also considered a panacea, which is one of my favorite words ever.
It's a great word.
Which means cure-all. So basically, Theriac would, as far as everyone who was selling it was concerned, would cure you of anything. It didn't matter what you had. This would make you better. Theriaca adramaki, or Venice treacle, which is the one that was most popular in the lockets in the 16th century, contained 64 ingredients, including, are we ready for it?
I am ready.
Viper flesh and opium.
I was not ready.
Yeah. And it gets better. So the ingredients, the 64 ingredients, including the viper flesh and opium, were mixed with honey. This was a medicine that was made to be licked away.
So savored, and it's
savor the viper flesh and opium.
Yum.
Yep. So essentially the opium hard candy of the time.
I hope it was a
lockets.
lot of honey and not a lot of the other 63 ingredients.
I feel like it was a lot of opium and a lot of honey and maybe less of everything else.
I mean, if you have enough opium, you don't really care.
And I did find a couple of recipes that involved the viper flesh being like roasted and then like marinated. And I decided not to include the details of all of that.
Probably. I mean, we already had Bezos, so I think that's probably enough.
Interesting factoid: drugs aside, due to the opium content, Theriac actually did have palliative effects against pain.
Shocking
and reduce coughing and diarrhea. So, I mean, it did actually work. It also just turned everyone into addicts. So, yeah. There's that.
Yes. So, prior to the Victorian era, lockets were private and personal items. Unless you're licking them
your opium was
in public.
For you.
And you alone.
And you alone. Even if you were licking it in public.
Right. You didn't offer to share?
I mean, I love you, Heather, but you can't have my opium or my viper flesh.
Dang it, I don't even want your viper flesh.
But it comes with the opium.
I do like honey. So they were worn close to the heart or secreted about one's person. And I would like to just say that I hate that word because in so many audiobooks, people say secreted. And that is...
Sorry.
Different.
It's very different.
If you have enough opium and viper flesh, maybe you
it's almost the opposite because one's like inward and one is like outward. Yeah.
All that changed in the Victorian era. So during Victoria and Albert's very public courtship and wedding, she and Albert would mark many significant moments with jewelry commissions that were widely publicized in the popular press. And she was essentially doing press releases at that point, even though that's not quite what they were called then. But, just doing her thing in public.
Well, and this was when the media, like this, now there's photography, there's, journalism that's widespread. We don't have television yet, but like this is when media is starting to become a thing for royalty.
Right.
I mean, it always has been to some extent, but
printing presses are in wide and inexpensive use. And yes, so everybody knows everything about Victoria and Albert. And their subjects, of course, because now you have the Queen actively influencing not just nobility, but everybody who has access to a paper, which is almost everyone, because even if you were in a service industry, you have access to older papers.
And even if you couldn't read, there were photographs.
Yes, exactly. Or drawings, engravings. Pictures. There were pictures.
There were pictures
to see. So this extended to the popularity of mourning jewelry after Albert's death and gave rise to an entire industry.
Yep. So Queen Victoria didn't come up with the idea of mourning jewelry, but she did mourn more visibly and publicly than anyone else ever had or could. But she had massive resources to do whatever she wanted, and so following the death of Prince Albert, she actually entered a state of permanent mourning, which is why every photograph you see from Queen Victoria's life after Albert died, she's in black. She literally, like, the mourning. I'm gonna take an unscheduled sidebar.
No.
Yes.
What?
So in the Victorian era, mourning was it actually followed fairly strict rules. You had a period of time after the death of your loved one, and this was variable depending upon how close you were to the person who had died, where you were in full mourning. And that, why does that keep blinking? That bothers me. And that meant, you didn't go to balls, you wore black, you were subdued in your social engagements, and you kind of kept to yourself. And that had a specific amount of time. And then you would go into what was called half mourning, which meant you could wear darker, subdued colors, purples, burgundies, browns, grays. And you could get out a little bit more. And then after the half mourning period ended, then you were done. Okay, Victoria was just like, nope.
I've had 47 children with this man,
and I'm in full mourning for the rest of my life.
Yes.
So she didn't just, so she had multiple mourning lockets made up for Albert. Because, of course, just like the rest of their marriage, this was another occasion to be marked with jewelry. The most famous of the lockets, and this is where I'm going to get to butcher some German, the most famous of the lockets was a gold memorial locket made with onyx and diamonds. Around the outside of the pendant, enamel letters spelled out "Die Reine Seele schwitzt sich auf Zugat." That was not super great German. But anyway, it means the pure soul flies up above the Lord. Heather could have done it better. Inside,
we gave it to you, Gießen.
Well, I'm sorry. I'm like 6th generation German. So inside she placed a lock of Albert's hair and a photograph of her deceased love. And this became a thing. Prior to this, mourning rings, which is another podcast that we might do, were the preferred method of commemorating the deceased. But after 1861, mourning lockets became all the rage.
People of all classes, not just nobility, wore mourning jewelry of some kind, even if one could not afford a photograph, because those were not easy to come by at that point.
But you could always chop a lock of hair off a dead person.
You absolutely could.
Snip, snip.
So you could get a locket and put some hair in it, and they had mass-produced lockets at that point. Obviously, they didn't spell out whatever you wanted in gold, onyx, and diamonds, but, you could have something.
Amethyst, diamond, opal, ruby, emerald?
Yes. The more affluent people, again, not necessarily nobility, but people who had a few dollars to spend could pay for intricate braids to be created from the hair of their deceased loved ones. And those
And
braids,
that's going to be another podcast,
yes.
is Victorian hair jewelry.
And, well, we should just do all hair jewelry.
Fair.
Yeah. Because those braids were typically displayed in glass front lockets. So they weren't your usual... The space wasn't very hidden because it was displaying the contents, but the braid could be seen while being protected.
And if you've ever seen a Victorian hair braid and you don't know it's hair, even if you're squicked out by hair braid, it's very pretty. Like
They are very pretty.
Intricate patterns. But random fact, many jewelers who were commissioned for hair weavings and braids played it a little fast and loose with their sources for hair. Oftentimes the keepsake was returned to the bereaved containing either the weaver's own hair or hair that came from a nunnery.
How did people not notice?
I mean, you weave it, you put it under glass, and then, I think you see what you want to see. But as somebody who has actually done a couple of memorial hair braided pieces, I will say that especially if the deceased is elderly, the hair is a pain in the butt to work with.
That's fair.
It's so, and I have hairspray. I'm sure they had some equivalent, but like
viper's flesh.
Yeah, viper's flesh and opium. But I can see why that happened. Anyway, continuing on.
So, unsurprisingly, advertising played a major part in the promotion of mourning goods and rituals.
Was there barbishing?
There was not barbishing, because they were just De Beersing.
There you go. Oh, we just coined a new verb. De Beersing. They absolutely were De Beersing. 100%.
But entire stores dedicated to mourning jewelry alone sprang up on both the continent and in America. Because America... we were separated enough from when we were a colony where we were like, ooh, that's interesting. Every time England did anything.
Yeah.
So the industry began to gain legs after 1861, shockingly, because Victoria was always very interesting to the Americans. And by the late 1920s, Newark, New Jersey, the jewelry manufacturing capital of the United States, was producing 90% of the 14-karat jewelry in America. Now, lockets were exchanged not only for mourning, but by sweethearts as well, especially if one of the sweethearts might be going off to war. And lockets featured prominently in the literature of the time, usually romantic stories. But
random fact. Very rare. And I think this is so cool. And I want one so badly.
Yes.
Very rare World War I and World War II era British and American military uniform locket buttons exist containing miniature working compasses.
I desperately want one.
I want one.
Would not make a necklace like I did earlier tonight out of that button.
No, I don't know what I would do. It would have a special pillow that it would sit on. And every once in a while I would open it and I would find North and then I would giggle and then I would put it back on its pillow. Like, how freaking cool is that?
It's really freaking cool. I have an umbrella that used to have a working compass in the handle.
I actually totally have a thing for compasses.
Oh, they're awesome.
I love compasses.
And the compass rose.
But anyway. A compass in a button.
Yes, that is so cool. So today, lockets have been fashionable again as part of the nouveau vintage fashion movement. Memorial lockets these days are much more likely to contain ashes than hair, but the desire to feel connection with someone when someone is not present.
Sorry. That was some tortured syntax.
Sorry. Whether it's because they've left us or you're just feeling the general isolation of this version of modern life, it's fairly universal to want somebody with you.
So there you have it. Death, intrigue, drugs, love, and loss, all contained within the space of a tiny piece of jewelry. That's hidden spaces.
Exeunt, pursued by a bear.
She said if I didn't put that in there, she would quit.
I did do that.
So thank you all so much for joining us for this episode of The Button List with Allison
and Heather. You can catch The Button List bi-weekly on Spotify, iTunes, and YouTube.
Watch our complimentary tutorials every Wednesday and Friday at 6:30 p.m. Central Time on Facebook, YouTube, and twitch.tv/beadingdream.
To stay informed on all things Beading Dreams, join our Discord, like us on Facebook, and follow us on Instagram.
Good night, everyone!